This week's big idea is God made people good in the beginning. Like the last big idea, we want to focus on God's goodness, but we want to focus on the goodness of God as it relates to human beings. And the Bible declares that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then He has this audacious statement where He says in Genesis 1, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." Being made in the image of God teaches us that we reflect the very goodness that God desires to share. Creation is a sharing, if you will, an outworking of His Godness, His goodness, and sharing with us. So, to be made in God's image is to be in some sense, a sharer. That we have, like the God we've been in the image of who we've been made, we too have been made to share and made for community. Unlike any other created thing, we have a capacity, a consciousness, an awareness of this God. And Genesis 1 is hitting on that. So this goodness really has this understanding of the creative energy, the sense of community, the sense of relationship that we can have with God. In a sense, just the good to share our lives, to share our gifts, not for our own thriving, but for the thriving of those things around us, whether they be created things like the creeping things on the ground, or the fish of the sea, or the birds of the air, but even the beauty and the mystery of sharing life together as Adam and Eve enjoyed it there in the garden. So that's good news. That's good. Something bad happens. Of course, as we talked about last week, Adam and Eve attempt to gain what they think is good without God. And that ushers in all kinds of darkness, corruption, and the spoiling of the universe, death itself to the human race. And then something terrible takes place in the life of Adam and Eve's offspring and in their own hearts and life. There is a power at work in their own souls that they cannot control and they cannot come to terms with. And that is the power of sin. It's really a beautiful, actually not a beautiful picture. It's kind of a dark picture we see with one of Adam's sons. His name is Cain. And God comes to Cain and says that the power of sin is like a lion crouching at the door of his heart. And God calls Cain and says, "It must not have dominion over you." I wish I could tell you the story ends happily, but it doesn't. The power of sin runs wild in Cain's heart. And rather than being good and a sharer, Cain is a taker. He's a grabber. And he takes the life of his own brother. And thus, in some sense, really is the history of us all right there. We are an attempt to take things from others, and we attempt to rob God, to take from God what rightly belongs to Him. We want to be like the people in the Tower of Babel. We want to make a name for ourselves by robbing God of His glory, using our creative energies and juices not to make God's name great, but to make our own name great. The Bible says this is sin. The good news, however, is this. God sent His Son, who was good, and who was not interested in making a name for Himself, but was interested in honoring His Father's name by a life of obedience. And although His fame went out throughout all the land of Judea and Jerusalem, at His core and at His heart, He was good. He was so good that He obeyed God's commandments perfectly and completely. He laid down His life in our place for us, so that we might be redeemed and made new into His likeness, so that it can be said of us one day that we are truly good again. This is why Jesus came, and this is very important for us to understand how we can attain or receive back the very goodness with which we were created to be.